So the topic is we're talking about Darchei Emori. We're talking about the a type of a world of superstition, and to understand a little bit more ba'omek what this world is about and how we're supposed to relate to it based on the things that we've been learning last week. So in general, when you say this concept of Darchei Emori, this is the ways, it generally means like a pagan practice. Emori was an ancient people, but Darchei Emori means practices. And Tosis and Avodah in Daf Aleph brings down that there's two types of Darchei Emori. There's two types of things that we say this is considered a forbidden act, a pagan act. One is when it's the Shem Akum, it's like has traces of Avodah Zarah, some type of ancient idol worship. And the second one is when it's in the language of Tosis, is das hevel v'shtus, that it's silliness and nonsense. And we're going to focus a little bit what this idea of shtus is. Shtus is like nonsense, a folly. And this is also what the Beis Yosef brings down in Yeridei Kufay Ches, that one is Darchei Emori, one form of Darchei Emori has to do with kishuv, like some type of black magic, which we will talk Be'ez Hashem next time, some type of negative force, and the other one is that we're not allowed to go in the ways of the pagans. So the language of the Rishonim, and it's important to stress the language of the Rishonim to understand that the language of the Rishonim is that it's a ma'aseh shtus. And another word that the Rishonim use is a ma'aseh toyu, like a wild act. So a foolish act and a wild act. So the Rambam, for example, in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Yud Aleph Halachah Zayin, the Rambam writes, talking about all different types, at the conclusion of talking about all different types of ancient pagan practices and idol worship, the Rambam writes, Shekol divrei sheker v'chazav, all these things are actually false and nonsense. Avabala chochma tmim adas, the wise understand berayis bruris, understand clearly, Shekol edvarim she'asa Torah einam divrei chachma, that to understand that all these things that the Torah says that we're not allowed to do is not wise things. Elo toyu vehevel. It's actually emptiness, toyu. And similar, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tefillin and Mezuzah, in Halacha Hey, in Perek Halacha Daled, the Rambam writes that if someone puts in the Mezuzah itself, writes different Shemas HaMalachim, names of angels, or puts in different psukim or choismas, which is this idea of these ancient mystical seals, writing the letters as informations. It says it's b'chal misha ein lechen l'kadam haba. This is someone that doesn't have a portion to come, and the Rambam talks very, very strongly against this, to use the mezuzah as a type of shmir, of a type of protection. And obviously the question is that the Gemara itself says, the Gemara says that that the mezuzah is a shmir, Shemedas Yisrael. There's a famous Yerushalmi Peh where he talks about one of the local kings put a mezuzah was to protect himself. And this is what the Kesem Mishnah deals. But either way, the Rambam, the language of the Rambam is that it's that these things are sheker v'chazav, these are actually fallacies, and it's ma'aseh toyu. It's ma'aseh shtus and ma'aseh toyu. It's silliness and the world of like toyu, confusion or chaos. Tohu, like Rashi says. So this is generally the opinion of the Rambam. And the Rambam writes about this more strongly in the Moreh Nevuchim itself. And this is also the opinion of the Rambam with regards to Shadim, with regards to what we'll translate as demons. That, and this is also the opinion of the Ralbag, that this is all nonsense and foolishness. And Rav Ben Rambam writes, and where he talks about the Mamar Chazal, there's a mimer that he talks about different Mamar Chazal, different writings of Chazal. He writes that the Shadim appear, this idea of demons appears to the person, the Marach Elohim, in a vision of a dream state, which means that it's not, doesn't have any actuality. On this, there's also a quite famous Gra, a Biura Gra. The Gra writes, the Vilna Gaon writes in Yeridei Kufay Tes, that's the next simon, that the Gra writes, on the Rambam that v'hu nimshach achar philosophy, that the Rambam followed the world of philosophy, and therefore l'chein kosav shkshafim v'shamas l'chashim v'sheidim v'kamei it's called sheker. Therefore, he writes that all these things are sheker, are false. Avo parhiko oisa kot godoi, we already hit the Rambam on his head, so to speak, and ela kol dvarim kipshutam, everything is literal, but he adds shaloi, but it doesn't mean literal in the literal sense that we think of literal. There's a pnimius, there's some type of internal understanding of what these things are, and the internal understanding of it is not a philosophical understanding, but a derech emes, the way of Kabbalistic understanding. So there's something that is called Maisa Kshafim. This is like Kishuf, which is not the topic I want to talk about, which is some type of black magic. And then there's also another form which is called Maisa Shedim. We had this in Rashi a few weeks ago where the Torah says Bilateim or Bilahateim. And Rashi says that one, from based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that one is Maisa Kshafim and one is Maisa Shedim. Now it's interesting that the Torah in Siman Kufayin Tes writes like this: Shemaisa Shedim b'chlal Maisa Kshafim. That really Maisa Shedim, the actions of Shedim, or we'll call demons, whatever, is the same thing like Kishuf, like something that's called black magic, and it's totally forbidden. But he writes like this: the Torah writes, "V'adoini harosh kosov shemuter lishol behem ala gneva." You're allowed to ask Shedim about something that's missing. But to do something based on asking a shed, whatever this means, the Torah writes that his father was actually the Rosh, the famous Rosh, allowed it. He was lenient to allow this. And that's actually the way in the Shulchan Aruch, when it brings down this halacha, it's brought down Maisa Shedim Asur, which is the general opinion, and then it says yes, we shemater lisho behem al gneva mavayir mo. Ramar is explaining because roiv oiskim za'ein niftar mem b'shalom alkein shema nafshi yichak mehem. Therefore, someone that's really wise should stay away from these things. Okay. Now, what is Maisa Shedim? I don't want to talk about Maisa Shedim in a literal sense, and whether Maisa Shedim is Shedim like the Ramban understands that Shedim has to do actually with some type of form, some type of actual life form that has Eish and Ruach, has fire and wind, but doesn't have Afer and Mayim, doesn't have earth and water. This is the Shitta on the Ramban. Or like the Rambam writes, that it's completely Shakavadimian, that it's completely false. And in general, we say that there's a tradition in the name of the Baal Shem, that the Baal Shem banished Shedim. And this itself banished Shedim to the fields, but the idea of really banishing Shedim, of demons, whatever this means, and this also can be understood in both ways. Does it mean that this is being literally, or does it mean that the oir that was revealed in light of Torah Chassidus of the Baal Shem automatically banished that entire concept of Shedim, period. Whatever we understand this, however we understand this, the idea of Shedim, Maisa Shedim, whatever the shade means, comes from the word Shoded, Shoided. It's something like a destructive force, a force of unnatural force, which means there's the normal course of events, and then there's something that's something that's like Maisa Shtus. That's an action of Shtus, action of folly, something that's deviating from the normal path of life. So there's the normal path, let's just say the conventional path, the rational path, and then there's something that sometimes deviates from that. That's called a Maisa Shtus. And the question is there room for such activity? Is there room for such a place? Because this enters into the world of superstition and the world of nichush, and the Zohar that some of you've learned today, the Zohar in Chelek Aleph, page 125, brings down that this idea of nichush is connected to Nachash HaKadmoni, is connected to the supernal snake, and the Zohar also connects it to to these two fallen angels. I'm just giving you words. We have to understand what these things mean. These two fallen angels, which is Azza, that's these two fallen angels that the Torah talks about. That the Bnei Elokim saw the Bnei Adam, and they intermingle at the end of Parshas Bereshis. This refers to, and even Rashi brings it down, that this refers to some type of fallen angels. This is a connected to the world of Shade and the world of Satan. The Chesed Avram brings down Mayin Shri and Ayat Aleph. The Chesed Avram brings down there's actually 11 different things that we actually give to Klippa. And he brings down different things that we do to Klippa. And he says the Av L'Kulam, the original one, the origin of all these ideas is connected to the Sar HaMishtalech, to the goat that was sent out to the wild, to the Azazel. And then he brings on this other things, let's say, Mayim Achronim, and the idea of the hair on the tefillin head, or the arlo that's buried in the ground. There's some type of behavior in the normative, not only normative, but in the Torah, it's a mitzvah, or certainly it's a certain types of things are minhagim, that there's some type of allowance to enter into a different path. That there is I want to call it a superstitious path, but there's some type of different type of path, some type of ma'aseh nichush that's almost allowed. And we have to understand what that means. What does it mean that it's allowed? And we talked about at length that when we talk about any type of subscribing to any type of thing, we're always saying that we're not subscribing to the thing itself, but we're subscribing to the sign, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Creator, who's revealing himself through this particular imagery, or this particular sound, or this particular color or vibration. But we're never getting stuck in the thing itself. But there's something about these things that are called shtus and toyu, called confusing acts, acts that are satam in aderech, which is this ein adam is a very nichdas beruach shtus. That the ruach shtus, the spirit of folly, deviates from the normal behavior. Like there's the regular path of things, and there's sometimes a deviation of that path, and that in itself has not only a healthy outlet, but the Torah actually allows that space for that outlet and encourages that. So the classic, again, like what the Chesed Avram is saying, is that the Av L'Kulam, the most strange of all these behaviors that we do, is the idea of Sar Mishtalech. Now, in the Sar Mishtalech, which is the goat that was sent, is that it says that it was sent La'azazel. It was sent to the place. The Torah says it's actually called Eretz Gzeira. It's called to the land of Gzeira. And Chazal, our sages in the Gemara, in Yom Samach Zayin, the Gemara actually speaks about what is this idea of Gzeira. What does the word Gzeira mean? And one of the interpretations of the Gemara says is that Shema Tamer Maise Toyehu, if you're going to think that the act of Sari Mishtaleach, of sending out this goat into the field and throwing it off the mountain, which it doesn't say in the Torah, this is Chazal understand it, that's the way it's offered. If you're going to say that this is a Maise Toyehu, this is like a wild act, and this is a confusing act, Talmaloimer Ani Hashem, and Gzartiv, and I said Gzer means that I made a decree, and you can't ask questions about it. So even though you think it appears to you that it's some type of Maisa Toyu, some type of confusing act, some type of act that's not the normal way of doing things, yet on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, this is an act that has to be done. So we'll get back to this. Now, the whole idea of Yom Kippur in general has to do with Teshuvah. And Teshuvah means a person taking, in a very simplistic level, Teshuvah means that a person takes responsibility, is aware, is conscious of his life, takes responsibility from his past or her past actions, and then chooses to live differently. So there's the Charata and there's the Kabbalah, the Zivus Achet. These are the basic principles of Teshuvah. I regret what I do and accept upon myself to do it differently, and I like all of my ways. Now, Teshuvah to be cognizant of tshuva means that a person is living with a type of consciousness, of awareness, which means a person becomes aware of their actions. If a person is not aware of their actions and is not self-aware, then they'll never do tshuva. They'll never take responsibility. So tshuva is intricately linked to the idea of seichel, of intelligence, that a person has awareness. And seichel, intelligence, is what gives the capacity to be some level objective in order to create free choice. So tshuva is directly linked to the world of free choice. Free choice when I'm making a decision. I have two decisions. A person has free choice, which means I could do it this way, I could do it that way, and I'm choosing to do one way. Where does the Rambam write the laws of Bechira, or the principles of Bechira? The Rambam writes it in Hilchos Tshuva, because you can't do tshuva. A person can't change their path if they don't have free choice to untangle themselves from their past. So it's automatically connected. And the height of tshuva, like the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, is actually on Yom Kippur. So very oddly, on Yom Kippur, which is the day that we take responsibility for our life, which is the day of our free choice, the day that we can choose and choosing our lives and choosing to take responsibility and to live a different way. One of the things that were done on Yom Kippur is a garl, is actually a lottery, and a lottery seems to be the opposite of seichel, the opposite of intelligence, because what a lottery means is that I don't know how to choose, therefore I'm going to throw this lottery, and however it falls out, that's going to be chosen for me. So it's true that these two goats that were sent, these two seirim that were sent, have to be shavim mara b'koyim. They have to look alike and have to be exact same height. But that in itself is a question. Why would the Torah set us up into a situation where the only way to figure out which animal should go where is through a garl? And the Gemara actually has a long conversation in Lavates and Mem. In Yuma, the Gemara has a long conversation whether actually the garl is actually ma'akev, whether it's such an integral part of the service on Yom Kippur that you must do the garl, or maybe that's the hanacha, putting the what you drew out on the animals. But certainly the garl is connected to something. Okay. And we're going to get back to this. So Yom Kippur is connected to the Sarah Mashtalech, and Yom Kippur is connected to the garl. And the garl means some type of arbitrary act. In Shulchan Aruch, in Orach Chaim, Siman Tov Resh 605, there's a very small siman in Shulchan Aruch, a very, very small siman, very small chapter, paragraph in Shulchan Aruch. And the Beis Yosef writes like this, that Mashadoyim lasses kaparos, that what the custom is to do kaparos, and kaparos is with the chicken. This is what the Beis Yosef is talking about. Machaber is talking about. Lishchat tarnagol yesh limnoya haminig. We should not do this custom. That's the whole siman. That's the entire chapter of this, the entire Shulchan Aruch. Today, the title of this siman in Tov Resh is Minik Kaparos Erev Yom Kippur. That's what the title is. We're not sure who actually wrote these titles, but this is the title the way it has today. Minik Kaparos is Erev Yom Kippur. The custom of Kaparos on Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, and the Beis Yosef and the Machaber writes that you shouldn't do it. Yesh l'noya minig. You shouldn't do the minig. But in the earlier versions of the Beis Yosef, of the Machaber, of the Shulchan Aruch, which whether the Rav Yosef Kaier actually wrote it or at least saw it, the title of this chapter was Minig Kaparos B'Erev Yom Kippurim Minig Shel Shtusu. That was the title. The title of the chapter was the Minig of Kaparos to do Erev Yom Kippurim is actually a custom of shtus, a folly, of silliness. And so I just want to focus on the word shtus because that's important. So the Machaber, the Beis Yosef actually says you shouldn't do kaparos, and yesh l'noyim kaparos. And where does this come from? The origin of this idea not to do kaparos actually comes from Teshuvah Rashba. So the Teshuvah Rashba in Chelik Al Shin Sadikei there's a famous Teshuvah of the Rashba. And the Rashba writes, the Rashba was the Rav of Barcelona in Spain. And the Rashba writes that even though I heard that in Ashkenaz, that's the way it's done. It means that they were living in Sfard, right, in Spain. Even though I heard in Ashkenaz it was done, and even though I heard that that I was asked to Paigon whether you should do kaparas or not, and he said you should. He says I say you shouldn't do kaparas, and the Beis Yosef on the tour, Tafreshay actually writes in the name of the Ramban that you shouldn't do kaparas because it's actually Darchei Emori. So not only is it a shtus, but it's a chash of maybe being Darkei Emori. However, the Ramah writes that not so. Which is the Minig Ashkenaz, that we should do kaparas. It's an old custom, and therefore the Ramah writes that we should continue doing this. And the custom goes back again to the times of the Goyim. Rashi in Shabbos Pei Aleph brings down a variant custom of kaparas, which is not actually with the chicken, but you do it on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and you do it with a plant. You plant a tree, you plant a little plant for every child, every person in the family, and then in Rosh Hashanah, you rip the plant out of the ground and you throw it into the lake. So that was some type of other custom. Anyways, the bottom line is that we actually, at Minig Ashkenaz, is to do kaparas, and especially after the teachings of the Ari, the way that Ari explained kaparas is actually we do it. But it still boggles the mind the actual action, because what the Ramban and the Rashba and the Beis Yosef write, that it slaps on the idea of seems to be connected to Darkei Emori, still rings true. So even though the Ramah Paskin's law rules that we should do it, we still have to understand why we do it. Those who do it, that even though it seems to be some type of shtus or toyu, ma'aser shtus or ma'aser toyu, it's still some type of shtus to kedusha, some type of holy craziness or something. And the Lavush, on Tafresh, the Lavush also has wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, wrote his own commentary, and the Lavush actually ties the kaparas very cleanly with the idea of Soy Mishtalayach. That the kaparas, he says, is connected, the practice of kaparas is connected to the practice that we do on Yom Kippur, Minat Torah, which is the Soy Mishtalayach, which also obviously ties into the idea of the original practice of, also in the Torah, which is the idea of the Goyal on Yom Kippur. In the Goyal on Yom Kippur, it says, Torah Practice v'hela shnei goralos. And the Mishnah says that the Kohen Gadol takes these two things. One says Lashem, one says Lasazol. He picks out these two things in the Goyal on this lottery. And if we say that the Goyal, this type of lottery, is in fact an avoida, which means that it's one of the services that has to be done by the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur, because it's done being 11, whatever the reason is that it has to be done. This is a very interesting avoida, because this is avoida is ksher b'smile. This is avoida that is actually allowed to be done with the left hand. Now, normally, in every other avoida in the Beis Hamikdash, besides Keturis, the Kohen Gadol had to serve with his right hand. It's a drash that we learn from the Psukim, where it says Yad means Yad Yamin. Has to be, and so much so that a lefty is actually possible. That means that it has to be with his right hand. And the Tosfos Yeshenu over there writes in Lamates, this is a ksheira avodah zu b'smoil, that this avodah is actually ksheira, is allowed to be done with the left hand, just like Eitzolas Kafa Machta b'Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, just like the taking of the Kafa Machta b'Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, when he had to go into the Kohen Gadol, he had to juggle these two things that he had to bring into the Torahs, into the Holy of Holies, so he was allowed to hold it with his left hand. So the left hand, generally, so in just symbolically, the right hand represents the world of chesed and the world of light and the world of order. The left hand, which represents the left side, represents also in Chazal, which is, let's say, Yad Kea, like the weak hand, the darker side. And that's specifically connected to which something that we talked about previously about Keturis, that the service of Keturis, the avodah of Keturis, which is with the Yud Aleph Simana Keturis, which is actually with the 11 Samani Aktoris, the 11 elements of the Aktoris, also included the Chalbana, which the Chalbana was a foul-smelling odor. And Chazal say that any fast that doesn't have even from the sinners of Israel is not considered a fullness. In other words, in order to create the proper scent of the Keteris, we actually needed things that were actually also foul, something that was on the darker side, something that like Satam and Aderech, things that were not in the normative place. And that's the Avodah Keteris. That's the service of Keteris, to elevate that space as well. Now let's get back to a little bit of the Sorah Mishtalech, and let's try to understand it. So go back to the Sorah Mishtalech. When the goat that was sent to the Tzoik. So the pasuk, the Torah talks about this in Vayikra Acher Nois, and speaking about this idea, about this one goat that was actually sent to the outside of Yerushalayim, was not offered in the Beis Hamikdash, which means it was not included in the Beis Hamikdash, but actually was a service outside the Beis Hamikdash. So the Even Ezer writes very famously. The Even Ezer writes, "She'ena korban, ki lo yishchat." The Even Ezer said that this Sorah L'Azazel was not considered a carbon. It's not an offering. It's not a carbon because it was actually not offered in the Beis Hamikdash. This is what he writes in the Even Ezer Tezayin Ches, and that's the same thing. Also, the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam in beginning of Teshuvah, also later it writes that it is called a carbon. That the Sorah Mishtalech is considered a carbon, and this is also what the language of the Gemara is. Actually, the Gemara uses a language of Samachtal. The Gemara says that the pushing it off the cliff, pushing it to the cliff, is actually the form of shchita, which means that the Sorah Mishtalech, which was done chutz, outside the Beis Hamikdash, not only was it a service, was an avodah, but it's considered actually a carbon according to the Rambam. And there's a grease on this that the Briskerov says there's a difference between before it's sent or after it's sent, and maybe before Shiluchai it's considered a carbon. After, like, that's the opinion of the Rambam and the Meiri. Also, the Meiri holds that it's a carbon versus after it's sent. We see that there's a type of that the Sorah Mishtalech, the concept of sending out this goat to the outside, is a kaponim, maybe some form of carbon for a certain period of time. And this is very strange, because what is actually the Sorah Mishtalech? What are we doing with the Sorah Mishtalech when we're taking this goat to the fields? So there's a Zohar. The Zohar in Chele Gimel, Kuf Aleph, brings down a mashal, brings down a parable. The Sorah Mishtalech is that there's a shepherd that has a lot of sheep, and he has to move the sheep from one side of the river to the other side of the river, and he sees that there's a wolf standing on the side, and he knows that if he takes one sheep at a time, every time he crosses the river, the wolf is going to attack another sheep. So what the shepherd does, he takes a very old sheep that's already old and is about to pass on, and he feeds it to the wolf. And the wolf keeps on being busy eating that sheep, and meanwhile, the shepherd can pull over the sheep, all the other sheep, to cross the river. This is what the Zohar says. And this is called shoichat, like giving bribery to the other side. And the Ramban actually uses this language. The Ramban over there uses this language, and it's based on a Pikad of Lezer, that it's a form of shoichat. It's a form of bribery to the dark side, to the other side. But we're doing it. The Gemara brings down that the Gemara in Samach Zayin, also the Gemara brings down, which we spoke before, that the nichush is connected to Azah and Azazel. So the Gemara actually says that the word la'azazel actually means la'azazel is Azah Azazel, which is Azah Azazel, which is these fallen angels, where it says Bayar b'nei Elokim b'nei Adam kitov. So this refers to some type of descent of like an angelic spirit, which means that it becomes like a shed, like a fallen negative side. And Rashi over there writes that has to do with with arayos. So this is what the Ramban writes, and then he connects this idea to Shadim, to demons, and he says that that Shadim are called mazikim in the language of Chazal, and in the language of the Torah, they're called seirim. They're called goats, and that's actually what the pasuk says. The pasuk 33 psukim later, which some people say that's what the Ibn Ezra is alluding to when he says, when you'll be 33, you'll understand what's the secret of the avodah of Azazel. The pasuk says, we should not offer any offerings to seirim. And Rashi brings down, and Rambam brings down, and all the commentaries bring down, that's Shadim. It's like the dove. And like seir, and this is like compounded like a lot of ideas that are connected with the idea of seir, like a goat, is the Maral brings down a Chodesh HaGadol that seir is 580, which is in Gematria Yetzirah. Seir represents a goat, which is like a behemoth daka, a megal behemoth daka Eretz Yisrael. The idea of a wild animal. So it represents something that's wild. It also represents something that's dark, because there's a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says in Shabbos that there was once Reb Zera once met Reb Yehuda. He was standing. They were standing at the doorstep of his mother-in-law's house. He saw that he was in a very good mood. That he was in a good mood. So he said, it looks like it's a good time to ask him any question. And the question that he asked Rabbi Yehuda was, "My time is imra." Why is it that when a shepherd is shepherding his animals, why is it that the goats go first, and then afterwards the imri? Imri is like another form of another animal. It's a wider animal. And Yehuda says, it's like the way of the world. That first comes darkness and then comes light. So Izim is connected to the world of darkness. The world of is the world of light and there's the world of darkness. That the difference between Or and Choshech is that Or, when there's light, things become distinguished. When there's light, I can say I see this thing and I see the other thing, and that's what light does. Light allows you to distinguish, to say things are, and put them in the proper context and put them in the proper place. When there's idea of darkness, means that things are biravuva, things are mixed up, things are you can't define it, you can't contextualize it, you can't see where it is. So Reisha Chashech of Hadanura, where the way of creation is first comes Erev, first comes evening, and Erev comes that comes something that's mixed up. And then comes Boiker, then becomes morning, which means that the way we start is first is the place of unclarity, and then there's the place of clarity. And in this, in the light, in this metaphor, in this mashal of this idea of light, is the difference. We'll also say very simply is also the difference between, like, say, your conscious self and your subconscious self. That the conscious self, which is the part of a person's, where a person is seichel, a person has intelligence, understands, and they're very conscious about what the cognizant and conscious of their life. This is connected to the place of quote unquote light, where I can distinguish, I can see this and I can see that. And then there's a whole subconscious level, which is the dunkle side, like the dark side, but not the dark side like in a negative way, not in a negative understanding of it, which some psychologists believe, but not in the negative side. But I'm talking about the subconscious, which is things that are not revealed. And in that place of the unrevealing part of self, where things are not clear, there's actually an irvul, there's actually a mixing of a lot of different things, and things are not clear. Now there is two types of service, two types of avodah that a person has, and that's why Azazel comes from the word zel umazeh. It's similar to the word zel umazeh. This is what Ramipana writes, that this one corresponds to the next thing, which means that there's two types of avodas Hashem. There's two types of service that we have to avodas Hashem, which is, like, we'll say, the normal way of doing things, and that's when we're like cognizant, intellectual, mindful, and aware, and dealing with our conscious part of self, and therefore we do things in a certain way. That's the path of Or. And then there's the allowance for the path. So there's the thoughtful level, the the normal avodah, which is the place, okay, call it normal, but that's the place of bechira. That's where that's where a person has two choices and says, I'm going to choose one thing over the next, which is according to my seichel, according to my intelligence. That's that a person becomes like divine in terms of like the revealing of or, and they have koyach bechira, what they're choosing. And then there is the loss, the surrendering of a person's free choice. And the surrendering of free choice, this could be the negative side of things, which enters into the world of tayr, of shtus, into the world of chaos, where things are not clear. There was a lot of chaos because there was no or yet. There was no revealing of light. And then or came, and then became revealed. But before the or, like in the pre-conscious state, in the subconscious state, everything is in a state of tayr, in a state of confusion and chaos. And these are two models. These are two modalities. The Baal HaKedah, Yitzhak Arma, which is one of the famous people that was thrown out of Spain in 1492, together with Abarbanel, writes in Shar in Darkei Yitzchak, Shar Samach Gimel 63, that when he's talking about the Soyer Mishtalech, he brings on the Rambam, Ebenezer, and the Zohar, and that genre of ideas, in particular Lezer. He also writes there that in the language it says it's minig hefker, bizoyan, that the practice of Soyer Mishtalech is a minig hefker. It's like it's a custom of hefker, of like a wild act. It's done in the midbar. So it's done in the desert, which is the desert is Yashav Adam Sham. It's the place where people are not settled there, which means it's a place that it's not a settled, organized, normative space. Adam Sham. That's the Makam HaShedim. That's the place of the Shedim. The Shedim are no longer not in the cities, but they're in the fields. This is the image of the Sadat Shedim that represents the idea of the wilderness. And not only is it a minig hefker, that it's done in the place of hefker, which Chazal also are doyers in Bamidbar Rabbah, that Bamidbar is the Malkum Torah, isn't the Malkum Hefker. Hefker is ownerless, and it's chaotic, a chaotic space. It's also the act itself of the throwing down of the soyer Mishtalech is also an act of the goat. Throwing down the goat is an act of minig hefker. And that through that act, there's it's v'nasa soyer l'vanoisam, that the soyer, and this is also the Medrash Rabbah brings down, that the Medrash Rabbah says that the soyer, the seer, is connected to ish soyer, which is connected to Esav, the man, the hairy man. So hairy goat soyer, v'avoinoisam, that, and it carries the avoinus, is the avoinus, the sins of the tam. And who's the tam? Yaakov is the ish tam yesh b'ha'al. So the sins of the tam is carried by the soyer, which is Esav. So Esav, which represents the world of Toyu, brings some atonement for the world of Tikkun, which is Yaakov, ish tam. So there's an opening for a type of behavior that the Torah not only sanctions, but the Torah actually says is a mitzvah or a custom. This is similar to what the Gemara says when the Gemara says in Sanhedrin and Beis, the Mishnah says, which some of you have learned that it talks about the misa, how a person, God forbid, if we don't do this anymore, but in the four types of misas, where it talks about the misa of hereg. So the Mishnah says is matizim es roisha b'sayif, that it's done with the sayif, with the sword. And the Mishnah says kederach shal malchus oisa, just like the malchus done, which means that was the way that people practiced it at that time. Where Yehuda says that it's nivelhu, and that's not the correct path. It's nivel, it's disgusting, and it's barbaric, and therefore manichim es roisha al and you do a different you do it differently. And the Gemara says that Yehuda says we shouldn't do a Messiah because that's the way of the pagans. It's the way of the Malchus. And what do the Rabbanon say? The Rabbanon say that kivon, that since it says saif deraisa leminai kam geminon, that since it says in the Torah saif, which we're dorish from saif, and the same also saif from malachim, that we say you're allowed to burn clothes or break vessels when a king dies, even though that's a pagan practice. But since it's brought down in Tanakh, the Gemara says, since it's brought down in Yirmiyah, it's brought down. Therefore, we're not worried about Darchei Emori. We're not worried for Darchei Emori, which means that the Torah itself understands, obviously, but the Torah itself understands that there is room for certain types of practices, like burning in an exaggerated way when someone passes on, when the king passes on, which was then a very strong marcation of mourning, that the Torah itself allows that. In other words, the Torah says that there's a type of Maisa Toyo, Maisa Shtus, that is allowed. And this Maisa Toyo, this Maisa Shtus, is not allowed in a normal course of events, but this Maisa Toyo, Maisa Shtus is allowed in abnormal situations. What's an abnormal situation? And this is why it's all connected, many of these practices. Av L'Kulam, like the Chassid Avraham writes, is Av L'Kulam is Yom Kippur. Because there is a shtus of klipa, and being that it's also Yud Shvat, it's important to note that one of the Torahs, one of the themes of the Rebbe's Torah that went through from the early years, you can find this already in the Rishonos, is this idea of shtus de kedusha, that there's shtus de klipa. In the Mayim Bas Nagani, this is a long arichas about this idea, and you can learn it, that there's shtus de klipa. Shtus de klipa means that a person gets stuck in a certain rut behavior, like a certain addictive behavior, gets into a very bad pattern of behavior that they stop even noticing that they're in a negative behavior. This is like the gullus of das, that their awareness is so in exile. This is what happened in Mitzrayim, that they're no longer even aware that they're stuck, and they get into a very deep, repetitive, addictive maise toyu v'shtus. It's if someone from the outside looks at them, and even if they were able to pull themselves away from themselves and observe themselves, they would see that they're acting very silly, and in a way of shtus, in a way of toyu. It's confusing, it's chaotic, it's not progressive, it's not developing yourself, it's not moving forward. It's just irvuv. It's a lot of choshech, and this is because their subconscious in this context, their subconscious, there's certain patterns of behavior that has been going on for such a long period of time that it becomes their automatic behavior that's informed by their subconscious. And somehow, the real idea of Teshuvah, the real possibility of Teshuvah, is to enter into that same place, and to rewire oneself in a healthy way. And the way to do that is sometimes, and this is basically what the Rebbe was saying for this generation as well, making some Mashiach, is that the way to do that is sometimes you have to do things that are shtus de kedusha. Shtus de kedusha is like the irrational, positive act. Like we were saying all this thing about Kapparos and Soimash Taleach and Azazel and the Goyrel, and that's sort of like to shock the system, to shock a person out of their stupor, out of their condition, that they're so stuck in their situation that you have to do something completely radical on the other direction that can break them free of their predicament, the way they're stuck, in order to get them out into a healthy and into a better pattern. So that's the Maisa Shtus and Maisa Toyu that's in a positive context. And here you have this idea where it talks about that there's nichush, which seems like the world of superstition, where superstition is by definition something that you get, your superstition, you say, if I wear this hat or this jacket or this shirt or this thing, that's going to bring me good luck. That's going to bring it's a narishkeit. It's a silliness. It's not rational. There's no rationale explanation why this would happen or why this would be. But you get stuck into that thing, into that, connected to that superstitious act. And this is what Chazal is saying, is like on a very deep level, that the nichush is connected to the shoided, to shaded. However we understand the world of shaden, but it represents this abnormality of behavior that exists, that roams in the free, empty space of the midbar. And sometimes we enter into that place and we get stuck. And to get ourselves unstuck, we have to do something that's radical, something that's completely, sometimes that doesn't seem seichelic, doesn't seem like it makes any sense. And the Torah says, okay, these times and these very important times of doing tshuva and really awakening yourself, that's really the idea of tshuva, is to wake up. That when we have to really wake up spiritually, to really be awake, is we need sometimes to shock yourself out of the system. It's like, if you have children, you'll know this. Sometimes your child is stuck in a very negative pattern of screaming, for example. And because maybe in the beginning there was actually a real reason, but then it entered into like a whole subconscious level, and they're screaming because for the sake of screaming, and they're just having a tantrum. Sometimes the only way to actually break them out of that is to actually scream back. And the moment you scream, all of a sudden they wake up, they actually realize, well, I'm screaming for no reason. So this is like the shtus, what we call the superstitious, or the subconscious, or that strange space of tshuva, where sometimes doing something and opening ourselves to do something that's satam in aderech, it's not the normative path of or to go into that subconscious place, to get in a place where it's irvuv. That's actually the tikkun in order to achieve a possible inner and personal redemption. And that's bekisser what I wanted to say. And Avramo, you can open it up, and if people want to ask shilas, we can go on to shilas. Questions.
Anybody want to raise your hand? Or
Yankee, you have anything to say? I got
That came to mind as you were speaking.
Yeah.
I was wondering where your thoughts are. Like Shaden is also Shem Shakai of the Schlossman.
I think that the word is that it's the shaded without the yud. It's like the undirected chaos. That the shakai, I don't have a good marker for this, but that the shakai represents the type of chaos, or the type of confusion, or that place, the very visceral and primitive place. That's why Shem Shakai is already, and the Shiur brings down, and I know that they can bring down that the idea of Shem Shakai is connected with Shaddayim, which is like with a mother giving milk, which is very, I won't say primitive, but very visceral and very, very pre-verbal state. And that pre-verbal state, that's what Shem Shakai, the Rakeh brings down. Shem Shakai is always, Anish Kel Shakai always appears in the Torah where there is birth, where there's when Hashem promises children. And it's a whole Gematria, Kurubu is Gematria 500, Shem Shakai, that this whole idea of Shem Shakai. So it's something very, not primitive, what's the other word, not primitive, like pre, some type of precondition. And that is the help of primordial, exactly. It's primordial. And that is actually the healthy one, is that one that has direction. That's the shindal with the yud. And then on that, then it just becomes chaos. It becomes like an open field. It becomes seir. It becomes like just a place of a lot of energy, like Esav, a lot of toyo energy. That's potentially something that could be redeemed, that can be brought together, brought in and internalized. But if it's not used in a correct way and doesn't have direction, it's just chaos.
Also, I think the theme you're touching on is somewhat similar to some of the texts we were learning about the Chash and Chayshis, where you use the object.
Correct. So, right, like the Ramban writes. The Ramban writes that, right? So the Ramban saying is that Nachash and Chayshis, the same object that brought you fear, that you're afraid of. He says normally when a person is bitten by a dog, they're very afraid to see dogs. And the Torah is saying is, it's almost like going to the belly of the beast, saying that the real fear is the fear itself. That and if you can encounter that fear, again, that's on a very subconscious level. Because if you see something, there's also a famous Ramban, and all the Talmidei Ramban brings it on. Say it's many brought on many that a person that's bleeding, particularly a woman, but the person that's bleeding sees blood wherever they look at. They see every mirror that they see, and every mirror that they see blood. Which on a very deep level, besides the fact that maybe on a little, but on a very deep level, that means when you're when you're stuck in a certain story, you start seeing that story everywhere. You know, some people say like, I started talking about you, and now every 5 minutes I hear your name. It's not true. You're always hearing the name, you're just not conscious of it. Now that someone mentions the name and you become conscious of it, now you start seeing it everywhere. Or someone says, you know, ever since I started thinking about the color red, I see red everywhere. There's red everywhere. But now you start noticing red. Because wherever your mind is present, wherever you're thinking about, that's what you start seeing. And so the people that are bitten by the snake, which again, the national which actually is obviously connected with nichush, is, I told you, the Chassidish Shavot, there's a very sweet Chassidish Shavot that says that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Maza b'yodcha, and Hashem says, what's in your hand? And he says, it's a mata, I have a stick. And Hashem says, like, if you're going to hold on to it, it's going to be a stick. The moment you're going to let go of it, it's going to become a snake. That's what Hashem is saying, that power of the mata, which has power, because it had the Shem Yikivotke, and had the Tzachadash Bachav inscribed in it, which means it was a mata that had force. It was like even like the Makna Shalom Meir had a lot of energy. And Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu that when you hold it, it's going to be a stick, and you're going to have control, and you're able to create miracles, and you're going to be infinite, and you're going to be able to potential to split the sea. The moment you're going to let go of it and not take control of it, it's actually going to turn into the snake, and it's going to become the boogie monster. It's actually going to start to control you, and you're going to be afraid of it. And this is what so this is what the Ramban is saying, is that Hashem is saying, you were bitten by a snake. Now I want you, in order to create a tikkun for this biting of the snake, and now you're afraid of the snake. Now you're seeing a snake and everything. I was like, no, we're going to take a snake and put it on top of a nest. It's going to be a picture, and everyone's going to look at the snake, and that in itself is going to bring your healing, because you're going to unlearn something on a very subconscious, a very deep, visceral, primordial level. So it's all interconnected, because the nichush serves something very primordial, I think. That the whole idea of nichush talks to a very primordial, a very primitive part of the brain. Like I'm stuck in this routine. Okay, I can't do it any different way, because that's what I'm used to. And by the way, nichush could be even like patterns of behavior, right? If every day you wake up like this and this, and you say, if I drink my coffee, then I feel good. If I don't drink, that's nichush. Also, that's a form of nichush. It's a certain like a subconscious pattern that's giving away the power. We spoke a lot, giving away the power from yourself to this object, and saying, if I drink this coffee, I'm going to have a good day. But if I don't drink this coffee, I'm not going to have a good day. Really? You're dependent on something external, like a cup of coffee. People say, oh, I had a bad sleep. So what, you had a bad sleep? What's the excuse? So what? Oh, today I slept well. Today I feel better. No, you decide. You have to create that hero. So I think it's.
The nekuda of the Shiur is that you can't counter shtus only with das, because then shtus still has a hold over you.
Correct. You can't. Correct. You can't counter your subconscious shtusim with conscious oir. Doesn't penetrate.
So how do you combat it?
Through shtus d'kedusha. Whatever you're doing in shtus, start doing things that are beyond your capacity that you're normally be able to do. Something that seems out of character, and push yourself. Go out of your comfort zone, and create new patterns in the brain, new brain waves. Shlomo wants to ask a shaila for a while already. So
yeah, I was going to say that I was thinking like who killed Bilam? Pinchas. Pinchas was the one who didn't dilly-dally. The mamish made the decision without even asking counsel. He wasn't done minachish, like by waiting, by delaying. Trusted his own intuition.
And what did he do? He did halacha ve'morim came. Yeah, right. He exactly did that. He did something that halachically is shtus. That's shtus d'kedusha.
Yeah, exactly. But he was able to kill Bilam, who mamish became a snake. He was so it hit his atzamos.
Correct. And by the way, that's what the Zohar said. The Zohar says that Bilam is the snake. Bilam becomes a nachash l'moini. That's what the Zohar says. Yeah. So Pinchas killing. This is very good sushtal. This is very good. that Pinchas, the one that did Shtus Kedusha, was able to kill Bilam, who's the Nachash HaKadmoni, which is Shtus Klipa. Satam Radarach.
Also thinking, Avram Avinu is also the opposite of Bilam. Chagavos is Avram Avinu.
Yeah.
Hashkem Avram Boiker. Bilam is also Hashkem, but Avram is Rizos. Like he doesn't have to have so much Rizos. He has so much time, but like his Indian of not necessarily the Shtus Kedusha, but more the Indian of Rizos is that Bilam is this waiting to counsel with the outside forces. He's waiting to receive information, and Avram is already touching, I'm going to carry the wood even though I don't need to for 3 days, and I'm going to take it extra, and I could have just waited till the third day.
Yeah.
Because, Avram is the opposite of Bilam, and also this thing like Nachshon. Nachshon in this week's Parsha, Imamish jumps in. He doesn't wait. He doesn't wait.
And Nachshon is Oises Nachash.
Yes, that's something that I also wanted to ask. Is someone was asking in my learning group, okay, this is Givaldic, this nice idea, but Nachshon is the same letters as Nachash. So why shouldn't it be a different name? Like, why is it did Nachshon have maybe a teva to be a dilly-dallier, and he overcame it? He overcame his teva? Like, what about Nachshon is, what's the relation to Nachash if it's actually the opposite of Nachash?
No, but it's the transformation of Nachash. It's transformation of negative shtus to positive shtus.
So it's shtus that he jumped in.
Avad shtus. What do you mean? Everyone, no one did it. It's satam raderech. It's an unusual act. Everyone says you don't do it, you're going to kill yourself, and he says no, I trust. That's shtus kedusha. He has a munah. That's why I didn't say it.
Can you explain what you said about dilly dallying? How is shtus?
I don't know what dilly dally is, so I don't know what that means. I'll just.
He's delaying. He was referring back to the church.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay, that's shtickle. Okay, I got it. Jorian, do you want to ask me?
Dorian has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering what's so special about the Emori? I know that they were from Canaan, and so perhaps it's the fact that maybe they're not any more shtusi than anyone else. It's just that we're supposed to live in their territory. And then that's one question, and the other one is they do happen to have like the root of a word of the word Amira.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if anyone says anything about
that. I also thought that about the second point, that Amori probably has to do with lachash, some type of divination of speaking. I don't know. I've never seen a marker for this, but I think it's a nice shtel. It's a nice connection. Why Darkei Emori? Apparently, this is the most simple reason, and there has to be some oimik. But I said the simple reason has to do, like in Eretz Yisrael, the kingdom right next to them, which is in Transjordan, was Amori, it was the Amorites, and they apparently were very powerful, and they had a lot of the world of superstition, which
they were close to it. They were
very close to us, and this is what the Torah was fighting against, this understanding that we're connected to transcendence and to fluidity and to Ein Sofius. And the Kolel Yisrael was continuously, Oiv de Habal and Oiv de Avodah Zarah because of that. They always wanted an image. That's a nachash, a superstitious image. That's the object in itself. So I don't know. It's a good shaila also. Why Darkei Emori? I would say there's obviously the historical reason, but there maybe something more boimic in terms of.
There's something about these practices that they spread. Like if you pick up on them, like a chain letter almost, right?
Yeah.
Like they say, if you do, they spread across the border. They.
I think people are very superstitious. In different ways. I think people have all different types of superstitions. People live with superstitions constantly. The hockey players making sure they wear the hockey shirt. I don't know. There's this constant nonsense of people being attached to certain things, and really the Torah is very high demand. It's like saying we're supposed to be connected to nothing, just to infinity. And everything can be exchanged. Could we live that way? It's much more comfortable to say, okay, this is time to make a golden calf and say this is what it is. But to live with it. To live like that.
The Shtreimel and all that, that's just the Kedusha.
If it's worn, that consciousness, it can be Shtus Kedusha, I think wearing a Shtreimel in Miami, is Shtus Kedusha,
about Emori is that